Howdy, Constellation community. Got Benjamin Diggles here, head of business development, with another partner update and a partner announcement. Those that have been tuning in lately know that in the last few weeks here, I've been starting to percolate some of the stuff we've been working on the last few months, as well as some of the stuff forward facing that we're going into 2021. And when I mentioned some of the stuff around Splunk, I think that's a great example of an ecosystem partner. And I'm going to keep saying ecosystem, ecosystem, ecosystem. The reason I mention that is Constellation isn't the end-all platform for everything. There's certain areas, much like the Splunk monitoring and analyzing of large data, that's just not our book of business. So considering that most of Fortune 100 companies rely on them as a market leader, it makes sense for us to partner with them to ease that adoption hurdle and make it a little bit easier to integrate into these existing tools that these enterprise folks focus on, as well as in the federal space, which they've already invested in. This name here is Kinnami. So Kinnami may be a name you maybe haven't heard of on the market. I certainly know this hasn't been leaked internally, so I'm really excited to announce this partnership. That said, know that they're a small emerging company, much like Constellation, with really big intentions. And while there are a lot of different really great solutions out there that kind of hint at some of the elements of what Kinnami does, Kinnami really is, in our opinion, a partner that we want to hitch our wagon to solve a very specific problem. And we're dedicated to going deeper with few versus wide with many. And so when you think about that Splunk kind of fitting that monitoring and analyzing and kind of reporting piece, Kinnami really focuses on distributed storage. And I don't mean that necessarily from like kind of hosting environments that you would see at a traditional cloud hosting providers, even though they do compete with them on a lot of their capabilities. What Kinnami has brought to the table is really fascinating, and it's something that allows for data or files of any sort to be cryptographically stored across many devices and unhackable. And that's very meaningful to us because pretty much every one of our use case requirements will require data to be stored somewhere. And while we may be able to ensure that data cannot be hacked as it's in transit, we're able to audit it and know within deep detail of what's happening with that data. Once the data is stored somewhere and put on, say even a thumb drive, we start to lose visibility as a technology, and it makes sense to start to bring in some of these other solutions. Kinnami was brought to us through our federal engagement with the U.S. Department of Defense. They are a Department of Defense customer, sort of at the same level of maturity as Constellation. So we're in a really fun pocket right now where we're able to take both of our platforms that are at a certain technical readiness level to prove out use cases that impact massive industries. I mean, that's why we're working together within the Department of Defense. So I've got a lot to cover here. I'm going to try to keep this brief, and I apologize that I sometimes am a little long-winded on this, but there's a lot to cover here to kind of help add some color around to why this matters. I'm personally very excited about this partnership, almost more than any partnership so far, even though it's not one of those big 3 billion ARR logos that everybody's clamoring for. This is like that magic elixir and finding a potion that you can put in your quiver, if you will, and really gives us like superpowers in our conversation to bring in a strategic partner into some of these use case workflows. So I took a couple of slides from Kinnami. I wanted to protect some of their sensitive stuff because they are doing some stuff that requires NDAs to be signed, but I've gotten clearance on most of the stuff, if not all of the stuff I'm working on here, or I'm presenting here. So really, when you think about device computing at the edge, this is where everything's moving, because it doesn't really make sense for data to be pulled in from disparate data sources, processed in a central fashion, then pushed back out for action. It's just a dying paradigm. And going back to us being involved with them in the DoD, they're focused directly in multi-domain command and control, or joint all-domain command and control, if you will. I mean, this is the precipice of the highest focus of the U.S. government when it comes to information warfare and just generalized IT sharing. So again, going back, if you think about multi-domain, you have groups like satellite and mobile ground agents, as illustrated here, sending data to a central authority. Central authority then processes the data, makes decisions around its validity, what it needs to do, and then spits it back out. And that's just not effective, and it's causing a lot of problems. And so what Kinnami is focusing on doing is making that data available at the edge and making processing possible at the edge that way, which a lot of those same features we do within Constellation, which makes both of our solutions truly a 1 + 1 = 3, or even 300 if you're a little bullish like me. But they're really focused on how do they put as many of those functions as close to the edge as possible to not only bolster higher levels of security, but really in the end, true interoperability and autonomy amongst constituents, kind of bringing that centralized authority out of the picture, and only sending appropriate data to that central authority when needed. So I know there's a lot of copy here, and I'm putting this up for those that want to pause the video and kind of pull out some of this stuff. But you know, I already kind of covered what the problem here is, but I am going to read this quote by the baseline requirements for government and military encryption algorithms. Centralized systems are too expensive and not fast enough to process, validate, and manage the volumes of data required for making quick decisions in the field without significant security risks. So the reason this is important because more data is coming online as I'm even speaking right now, and it's creating more roadblocks, slower transition times between different constituents, and increased security risks. So this is a huge problem that while we as Constellation can affect many pieces of this, this really is an amazing partnership where they affect other parts of this ecosystem to really build a true end-to-end solution. And you know, in the federal opportunity, you know, I'm not going to go too deep on this. I touched on JADC2 and why these governments are wanting to move to zero trust. They just can't move this stuff to a central authority. So this is, and as it says over here in the bottom right, unfortunately, going to zero trust can't be done with a single product or platform. It often requires a bunch of different technologies like multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, continuous monitoring, and others working together in a zero trust framework. So again, ecosystem. This is no longer the world of Google trying to take on the world. We need to work together with other key technologies, and that piece of interoperability of blockchain is why there's such a renaissance happening in capabilities amongst these different tech leaders. I'm not going to dive into Constellation because you guys know who we are, of course. So, but I am going to touch into a little bit here because it's important to understand how these two pieces fit together. So, I'll go right from the middle section here and then dive to the green, but our system is scalable, distributing the categorization of work to computing nodes on the network and fast enough to process new data arriving in less than a second, which is ideal for processing the data stream, generally by sensors and IoT devices and for the like. For example, this can be used to establish irrefutable compliance with rules such as government regulations or security policies. So really think about the compliance piece. While our technology can do a lot of stuff, we really give that kind of check mark to show that this stuff is irrefutably compliant. So going down to the green, the underlying datum itself is not stored in Constellation Network's platform. And I say this to all my federal folks, like, hey, CIA, hey, DHS, hey, whoever we're talking to, we won't store your data. We don't even really actually need to know what it is outside of the validation criteria that hashes it and puts that metadata onto our ledger so that it's always referenceable. So instead, the platform relies on external storage management system, which can be referenced by the platform. For DoD enterprise command and control secure communication needs, that external storage management system must be capable of satisfying the security requirements for the data being stored at every site where the data may need to be accessed and or stored. And this is where Kinnami comes in. So Kinnami, they position themselves as the resilient data platform. Again, we don't store the data. So I'm going to go through their features here because I think it's important for folks to understand it. So number one, the platform integrates data security, data protection, and data availability as a single technology, avoiding the need for patchwork of solutions in these three areas and hence data leakage resulting from misconfigured solutions. The platform separates the responsibility of end users from administrators when working with end users' data. The security technology enforces and audits this boundary. End users create, modify, and otherwise use data, but are not responsible for its storage, protection, and security. Administrators are wholly responsible responsible for the data storage, data security, and data protection, but are not able to access the data themselves. Administrative actions such as moving data between storage devices do not disrupt end user access to data. It's very important. That's kind of that workflow efficiency piece. The platform assumes that any storage device may store data. This includes laptops, desktops, mobile devices, removable disk servers, cloud storage, etc. Additionally, all access points and storage devices are treated as hostile to a greater or lesser degree. Consequently, storage devices as well as access points owned by and administered by other organizations can be used if desired. Lastly, the platform is designed to operate under limited networking conditions, making it ideal for information access and storage at the edge of the network. This is where satellites are very important. Sometimes they lose connectivity. Sometimes they're slow to transfer things. So that data is sitting there, and it's extremely important that if it is isolated and offline, that it is secured, and that if it does get touched, somebody knows who touched it, when they touched it, and provides the appropriate permissions or access. Adding a blockchain to this auditing system adds irrefutability of the audit trail, which may be necessary to show objective proof to support joint all-domain command and control cross-domain operations. And this is where Constellation comes in. So hopefully we're understanding the importance of disparate data storage, but the ability to audit it and notarize and validate that the data that is being stored is what it's supposed to be. So moving along here, I will let you folks kind of look through what the joint solution here is, and kind of tease out some of these really great features. But specific to JADC2, Kinnami's platform augments Constellation Network's platform by providing the secure access and storage management system that control and command operations need, including the ability to securely transmit and store confidential information on storage systems owned and administered by another organization. So moving on, this is a great, I got to clear these notes here. This is a great slide that just kind of gives a high level kind of marketing view of how the thing works. Some of this has been seen in some of our other pipeline, but really you have that source data that the moment it comes off of wherever it's streaming, it hits Constellation, and that's where it becomes validated, cryptographically secured, and notarized. Again, back to that metadata is hashed. We don't even need to know what it is. We just ensure that it's doing what it says it's supposed to do based off the validation criteria. A lot of folks think that Constellation sits on top of this stuff, but if you really think about it, we kind of fit in the middle of the data's travel, of the data's journey. Then it hits Kinnami. And Kinnami then uses a product of theirs called AmiShare, creating a secure container around the data itself. Then the data is fragmented and encrypted into multiple shards. So this is a lot like old school BitTorrent, where it would take a Spider-Man movie and break it up into 1,000 pieces, and those 1,000 pieces would all be stored on random seeds on different computers. And then as you download it, it compiles those into a single file. And then lastly, the data fragments are stored around multiple locations, like I just explained, and then it's reconstituted for end user access. And all the time it's doing that, even in the sharding, all of those pieces are being tracked by Constellation's network. And this requires, if you think about all those shards and the throughput, a big data solution like ours. So moving on. One thing I'm really excited about, and this is something we're starting to see, and I haven't really been talking about this too much, is companies are starting to bring us into their DoD contracts and grants, which is awesome. This is an example of one that Kinnami just won. They've actually won quite a few lately, but this is one that I'm allowed to share, is called Agility Prime. And it's an STTR, so it's a research grant that's really predicated on flying cars and drones. So I'm not going to go too much into the detail of what this is about, because they've asked me to keep the cards close to my chest, but they partnered with West Virginia University on this, and they won it. So we're going to be working with them. And as you can see, they have some other strategic partners besides Constellation that are a part of this deal. Again, we satiate a piece, a capability within that ecosystem workflow going back to the very beginning. These solutions that are going to really bring that JADC2 vision to the next level is going to require an ecosystem of solutions like ourselves. And so that's why this is so meaningful. And so I'm going to continue to share some of these other releases of different groups that are bringing us into their solutions, because they do need a big data blockchain validation layer for their solution. I did want to ground this into one use case that we're going to be talking a little bit more when we go into tax regulation. And tax regulation hits a lot of different industries. And the one that I'm just touching on here that kind of helps make sense, because it's probably the most ubiquitous to the common folk, is point of sale data. You know, retailers. You go into, say, a Nordstrom or, you know, wherever. You go into a Sears if they're still in business, and they may swipe your credit card on a point of sale system like Micros or Square or whatever. Well, those systems have hooks in them that work with different vendors that hit the requirements for that retailer to be able to show proof of compliance that they're paying their taxes and doing their tax regulation according to the book, and that the machine is not doing anything nefarious, it's not doing anything corrupt, spoofing any of that data or whatnot. So, you know, kind of following this flow chart, if you look at the bottom square boxes there, you got point of sale transactions that are happening from a myriad of subsidiaries. And those transactions then are created into PDFs that are receipts, transaction receipts. Those transaction receipts then are stored on-premise solution, like a server that's on-premise, not in the cloud, and they're archived. They're kind of compressed down and archived. So if you look all the way to the far right there, you have these local tax authorities that are sending requests, or audits, if you will, that will then randomly pull one of these archived files over and then audit it. And the problem with this is, you know, there's a lot of problems. One is the slow processing, central and unsecured, bulky and costly of the on-premise solution. Sure, they have to keep it on-premise so they can hit those security requirements, but it's slow. And if somebody was to come on site, they could actually get to this stuff. And so it does have some vulnerabilities that's not taking advantage of some of these modern tools that are really applied for the cloud. The other thing is that these local tax authorities will only get an archive, you know, like meaning that they're not really getting the granular level of depth that they potentially would want to get to without a lot more manpower. It's almost kind of like a Russian doll where they have to keep on opening up the next layer versus being able to see all layers of the Russian doll at once, even though that they're combined. So this is one of the things that really is a wrench in pretty much every tax authority's, anybody that has to deal with the tax authorities. So this is one of those things that's causing a lot of problems, because they have to hit certain security requirements to move their stuff to the cloud, but since they can't, they're still using kind of this archaic solution, which is becoming problematic. So by adding Constellation and Kinnami to this solution, we're able to hit those security and compliance regulation measures to ensure that their data can move not only to the cloud, but really anywhere. If you want to keep storing it onto a on-premise server, even though it's clunky and slow, you can do that, because Kinnami will ensure that the files are sharded and spread out so that no one can actually hack them and get to that data. But furthermore, with Constellation on top of it, and as those microsystems send that data off, we're able to cryptographically secure all the complex data sets, just like that Russian doll example. And that way, so it turns this from auditing, which is kind of a weird way of saying, because it's no longer an audit, to true alerting. Alerting is really like informing them in the moment of anything that may be corrupt, missing, and whatnot, versus taking a sample out, which is really a lackluster approach. And we'll talk a little bit more in the future here on where auditing is just kind of a bad word, and why we need to kind of shift the mindset away from why auditing is not the future. It's really around real-time proof of compliance. So wanted this to sink in to kind of show just a basic use case around retail receipts. So last thing I'll say, and I know that this is coming on 20 minutes, but I think this is very good to help paint the picture of why this fits a big kind of hole for us in our ecosystem. We wrote an overview paper. Nikki on our team, who's awesome, she put this together. I worked with her in Kinnami on it. And so there's a link on our homepage here, and I'll also make the link available in the notes of this video. Please check this video out. It'll give a little bit more information than what I've shared here, and you'll get a chance to understand why this matters. But yeah, so download that and look for more. We're going to start announcing more projects that we're doing with Kinnami because, again, they're just kind of hand to fit the glove of what we've got going on. And I'm going to, again, last thing I'll say is I'm going to start announcing other partnerships in the ecosystem that kind of fit this full picture, so that when we go to the federal government or a massive commercial partner, they're going to ask, how do you handle storage? How do you handle hosting environments? How do you handle system access? How do you handle dummy data and moving to production? How do you handle storage and security of storage? And it's not our responsibility to solve all those things, but it looks really great if we're buttoned up and we have a tight, strategic, integrated partnership with all the right leading players to bring a best of breed solution to those constituents. So very excited about this one, more to come. And if you have any questions, hit me up in Telegram. And thanks for those that stayed for this entire 20 minutes.